Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday, part of AURI Connects monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogan, the AURI Director of Government Relations and your host on Webinar Wednesdays. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. This program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and ag industry to improve competitiveness of producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs through ongoing, purposeful connection on resources and partners along the value chain, and increase knowledge of opportunities, technologies, and trends. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found later at auri.org. Today, we'll be hearing from Jason Robinson. Jason has been on the AURI food team for almost 2 years as a project development director, working with food clients to develop their businesses. Prior to joining AURI, Jason spent 19 years in corporate research and development at a Fortune 500 food manufacturer as a product and process developer across a number of food technologies. Today, Jason will be talking about AURI's work on a packaging guide for scaling food businesses. Remember, you are and will remain muted, but Jason will be answering your questions at the end of his presentation. And you can send us your questions through the Q&A portal, and we'll be asking the questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, Jason Robinson, welcome to AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday.
Great. Thanks so much for that intro, Dan. Very much appreciated. I'm excited to spend some time this afternoon telling you about the public domain tool AURI created just about a year ago. So we'll be sure to jump right in. Oftentimes, when a food business considers their packaging, their thoughts turn first either towards graphics and consumer communication or to the sustainability credentials of the package itself, such as the content of post-consumer recycled material or biodegradability. This guide focuses on the less obvious considerations of package selection that should be optimized for a food product to successfully travel through a professional supply chain, and was funded jointly by AURI and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture as a result of conversations with small food businesses and other ecosystem partners. We recognized that in these conversations, time and again, hearing of a need to help these businesses simply get smarter about their food packaging, more or less transforming what we would call unknown unknowns into known unknowns, thus enabling these businesses to have smarter conversations with their suppliers that they may not have had the knowledge to have before. The guidebook is broken into 3 core content areas, which you could describe as the 3 jobs that a packaging solution must deliver. We'll walk through each one of these jobs today, but please note that this webinar is but a companion piece to the guidebook itself, which explores key concepts regarding each of these jobs in detail. Both will be available for free at auri.org/guides. And in addition to this webinar and the guidebook itself, there's also a companion video which delves a little bit more deeply into some of the concepts that were more difficult to understand in text form. Please note, this guide does not cover packaging sustainability, and we will get into the reasons behind that a little bit later. So let's talk about the first job of your packaging solution, which is all about protecting the eating experience. Have you ever had a stale cracker or rancid peanuts? Environmental conditions to which a food product is exposed dictate that product's sensory experience over its shelf life. And the package itself plays a crucial role in preserving the quality experience of that food product. Understanding how product exposure to environmental conditions such as environment temperature, humidity, oxygen, or the air itself, and light exposure can significantly impact your product over time. And that will help you define the package structure barrier properties, or what we call the attributes of the package that manage product exposure to both moisture and oxygen, the graphic design, and seal integrity that all protect the shelf life of the food product and will help you set that crucial code date on the package itself. Have you ever opened a can or a bag of chips and been disappointed with the number of broken pieces, as you can see here in this Pringles example? Proper packaging, particularly the proper primary package, will protect or at least minimize damage to the food product as it is transported through the supply chain. To minimize product breakage, you must properly define not only that primary food contact package, like the bag or the can, as you can see here, but also the secondary package, such as the corrugated case, which is sometimes referred to as cardboard, and oftentimes even the tertiary packaging elements, such as the pallet layout and the structural elements used on the pallet to transport via truck and forklift. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But the final topic I wanted to cover here as we engage in food protection and safety is really about the most unnerving of food safety scenarios. And that's the risk of intentional alteration of a product with the intent to harm, or adulteration. Such an event could be absolutely catastrophic for a small food entrepreneur in the short term, due to recall costs, and in the long term, resulting from damage to the brand reputation. Therefore, it is crucial for the food business to protect its brand and meet consumer expectations by providing visual proof of product integrity using tamper-evident packaging, which is an example that you can see here by using a shrink sleeve. Interestingly, the FDA does not, by law, require tamper-evident packaging for food. Instead, they focus on food protection and defense at the manufacturing level and strongly encourage tamper-evident packaging, though it is defined and required for pharmaceutical products. I would argue that consumers themselves also expect tamper-evident packaging today. And if a package does not have proof of tamper evidency, then that is likely a flag for consumers that something is wrong here, particularly given some of the media attention we've seen in the past few years related to ice cream licking incidents that have been seen on social media. I encourage you to look those up to get a real clear picture of the importance of tamper evidency. Let's move on to the second job of the packaging solution. That's really all about preserving the shopping experience and providing protection through the supply chain. In a professional supply chain, people and machines repeatedly handle product as it moves from the point of production to the retailer and then into the consumer's home. Each handling creates an opportunity for damage, which impacts a consumer's purchase decision. This is known in the industry, that first interaction with the package, as the first moment of truth. Or, as I mentioned, the first interaction that a consumer has with your food product. Take a look at the crushed cereal boxes in this first picture. Have you ever moved product around on shelf to find one that is undamaged? I certainly have. Even though I know that package damage isn't necessarily correlated to bad product. Now take a look at the damaged tomato sauce cans. In this case, the damaged packaging may actually impact food safety as well, but we know that it definitely reflects poorly on both your brand and your bottom line. In many cases, the food business and not the retailer is financially liable for all damage incurred in the supply chain through to the point where it comes on shelf. In addition to the primary package, the secondary package, which contains a defined number of the primary packages, also provides physical protection to both the product and the primary package. This secondary package is often referred to as the case, the master case, or the shipper, and is typically a corrugated folding box, which is oftentimes mistakenly referred to as cardboard. It is meant to protect against damage from falls or impacts, as well as be an aggregating tool for primary packages. These cases are then stacked onto pallets, where the stacking strength of each case, the stacking pattern on the pallet, usage efficiency of the pallet square footage, and stretch wrapping of the cases on the pallet protect against movement and thereby damage during transport and handling in the supply chain. And while you can't protect against every possible source of damage, accounting for Murphy's Law, which might be a fork truck or forklift running into a warehouse pole, product first, tends to be a good rule of thumb in designing for protection through the supply chain. Finally, the guidebook also dives deeply into a number of distributor and retailer considerations for which the food business must account. Distributors are primarily focused on efficient product movement through their systems, which would typically be measured by case or pallet turns and is significantly impacted by pallet design. You'll often hear distributors speak in terms of pallet case count, underhang or overhang, stackability, and pallet height or weight as key factors. All of these factors tend to impact how quickly product moves through the warehouse and how efficiently they can stack it and maintain it in their warehousing systems. And if you're confused by terms such as overhang or underhang, what that really refers to is how much of the pallet is actually visible once it's fully stacked, or if the cases hang over the edge of the pallet, which is a recipe for disaster when using fork trucks to move pallets throughout a warehouse. Retailers, on the other hand, are primarily concerned about the velocity with which individual packages move from their shelves to consumers. And this is measured by the more generic term, turns. In this case, structural and graphic design of the package must work together to define the most effective and efficient product orientation and display to maximize velocity of product as it's sold through on shelf. This tends to be characterized by retailers using attributes such as case packout, product display and orientation, and placement in the store. And if you want more details around those individual terms and what they mean, I would refer you to the packaging guide itself, which goes into a little bit more detail around what each one of these items mean and how they're most effectively used by retailers to maximize turns. I'll also call out that the companion video available on the AURI website, in conjunction with the guidebook itself, does an excellent job of illustrating many of these concepts in practice that are more difficult to read in text form. So I would encourage you to watch that 5-minute video if there's confusion around how these different concepts really play out in the distributor and the retailer itself. So as we move along, we'll move on to job 3, which is really all about selling and how do you effectively differentiate in the marketplace. One of the most critical functions of packaging is its ability to help sell a product. Remember, in the industry, we call this the first moment of truth, or that first interaction that a consumer has with the brand. For many small businesses, marketing funds are limited, and product packaging becomes that primary vehicle used to differentiate product from competition, to communicate benefits, and of course, to drive sales. Not to mention all that we've already talked about in terms of protection through the supply chain and food safety. It's often said in the packaged goods industry that consumers need to be able to select a product in 5 seconds from 5 feet away in a retail setting. From each shelf set that you see here, what sticks out to you? Think about that in the context of how many choices consumers have as they walk through a grocery store, with not only multiple distractions, but also with limited time. A successful package will grab attention, it will quickly communicate its primary benefit, and will make variety selection easy. But what are the primary tools? Again, let's take a look at these shelf sets. First of all, you can see color, or what we would call color blocking, used in the shelf set on the right to help consumers quickly locate specific brands. For instance, do you see Cheerios? The distinctive yellow color creates an opportunity for hunters, not necessarily shoppers, but for hunters to quickly and easily find what they're looking for because they've associated that color with the particular brand that they know and love. This is one use, but you can also use color to demonstrate a benefit. For example, the color red might be used to indicate a strawberry flavor in the yogurt aisle. Or in the sauce aisle, red could indicate a spicy hot product. And the color green might indicate a brand with a clear sustainability message. Shape and structure of the package can also be used to differentiate on shelf. For example, a unique package structure, shape, or even texture can help to break through the clutter that you see on shelf. But as with color, using unique package attributes to reinforce product messages are typically more impactful. So let's take syrup, the maple syrup category, as an example here. We don't have pictures, but imagine that packaging in a maple leaf bottle versus a standard bottle really denotes the authenticity of the product inside and reinforces the message that this maple syrup is authentic and not made from corn syrup. Think about the Aunt Jemima bottle that's also in that same category. That Aunt Jemima bottle that's in the shape of their iconic female logo reinforces their just like homemade messaging. And in both cases, there are different primary messages that the brand is trying to get across to consumers. In the one case, the maple leaf bottle would indicate authenticity. In the case of the Aunt Jemima bottle, it's all about a just like homemade message or a nostalgia message. And finally, as we're thinking about specific messaging to consumers, understanding how consumers make their purchase decisions can help to guide what information you would want to prioritize on the package itself. Think about it this way: the more prominent that messaging element, the more impact it has on a consumer purchase decision, which will then guide graphic design. That messaging may include product claims, but it's important to understand if there are any legal requirements for the claims you wish to make. As an example, many nutrient claims, such as low sugar or good source of fiber, are federally regulated. So you have to ensure that you meet those standards to avoid potential FDA crackdown on what it is you're trying to communicate. Other claims just might not have relevance with either your target market or the product itself. For instance, labeling table salt as non-GMO is irrelevant, as salt is not a biological product and could never be genetically modified in the first place. But because of the consumer dynamic to look for non-GMO, there's a tendency to want to put claims like that on products that don't necessarily reflect or have any relevance to that particular product. I'll also go back to the picture on the right that you see here and draw your attention again to the Cheerios box. Notice that the bowl of Cheerios on the box itself is in the shape of a heart, which very clearly reinforces the messaging of Cheerios and its claim that the oats it uses are healthy for you and will contribute to lowering cholesterol in your diet. So that's an indication of very clearly demonstrating the claim and the message that this product is communicating to your consumer without resorting to a laundry list of claims that forces a consumer to read through them to really understand what they're getting at. And remember, 5 feet, 5 seconds. That will very clearly help you zero in on the right message that you want to contribute to your consumers. And so that really leads us to this comment of the fact that product claims and that more is not always better. So thinking back to that 5 feet, 5 seconds rule, a laundry list could backfire by actually confusing the consumer. So the takeaway is really that targeted, concise, and clear messaging that might be reinforced by the package structure, the package color, or the graphic design will give your product the best chance to stick out in a crowded category or on the shelf set itself. So I mentioned this previously, and I wanted to directly address it because many businesses are very concerned about how do we deliver against what we believe our consumers want in terms of global responsibility and how I can demonstrate that as a food brand on the shelf with my packaging choices. So why didn't we cover sustainable packaging strategies on this in this document itself? And the reason behind that is that this guidebook is focused on providing base knowledge related to package structure selection and graphic design. And these are the necessary elements to create a business that is financially sustainable in the long term. And so the point here is that for a business to make larger scale impact according to their responsibility, whether that's for climate change, for the environment, or to have in general just a socially responsible or environmentally responsible business, the business needs to be around long enough to make that impact. And so the goal of this guide was to provide that level of base knowledge that allows businesses to make informed decisions about their packaging. The second point is that more sustainable packaging strategies really are still in their technological infancy relative to other strategies. And they tend to compromise both product shelf life and cost structure if not applied in the right manner. But in general, they tend to be inferior to their perceived less sustainable options. Some examples here, biodegradable and compostable packages are not backyard compostable. And so what I'm getting at here is the fact that while you can highlight the fact that you're in a compostable package, the reality is that there is not the level of infrastructure available to easily compost those packages under conditions by which they're compostable. In other words, compostable packages are not packages that you can throw into your backyard compost pile and expect them to degrade in a short amount of time. It takes very specific conditions under which those packages become compostable or biodegradable. Additionally, recycling infrastructure is somewhat lacking in the United States. And while we all have the ability to put our used packages into the recycle bin that will then get taken away by the city or state agency, the reality is that end-use markets for some of the recycled material don't exist in as much a form as we would hope to encourage large-scale recycling. And in more rural areas, the lack of easy recycling is prominent. So the ability to even recycle some of the waste materials isn't even a possibility. And then the final point is that consumer behavior in general is geared towards a consumption rather than a conservation attitude. And while that is changing, there is still an element of consumer education to indicate the reason behind and the reasoning for large-scale recycling and behavior that impacts our global responsibility. Our intent is to update the website with supplemental materials related to more sustainable packaging at a later time. But as I mentioned previously, our goal was really to focus on providing that base level of knowledge first, so that you can make a good business decision that will sustain your business over the course of time and evolve towards more sustainable decisions as your business grows and can support itself. And so with that, Dan, I will turn it back to you, as that is the end of my prepared content.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. And we're going to come back to sustainability a little bit here during the Q&A session, I think. I should point out to some of our participants today that we have been informed that we are having some technical issues with our Q&A portal. We do have a few questions for you, Jason, but not everybody is able to log into that portal today, and we apologize for that. Let's go back to getting started. As you get ready to scale up maybe a family recipe, or you're an entrepreneur who's been selling to family and friends, and now they're ready to get involved with a distributor. In regards to packaging, when you first get started, what are some of the first steps an entrepreneur should be thinking about as they start to get ready to get into packaging?
Well, one of the first steps that I would really want an entrepreneur to be thinking about is not to just go online to Amazon and pick out what looks really good according to the specs that are delivered. One of the key things to understand are what we would call, what are the failure modes of your product? Meaning, how does your product fail over time? Does it lose moisture and get stale? Or does it develop an off flavor that might be a result of exposure to oxygen? I always like to use the example of leaving crackers or a box of cereal open on the countertop, because everyone has experienced this at some point. The dryness of those products they have less moisture than the environment. And so over time, those products will leach moisture from the atmosphere and will actually start to get what would be termed, sometimes be termed stale. They'll get soft. You'll lose the textural attributes that make those products unique. And so one of the first things to understand is, how does your product fail, so that you can define what are the packaging attributes that are most important that my product needs to be protected against. And so with that in mind, I would always recommend talking to somebody with a deep understanding of developing packaging. There are a number of small packaging businesses that are designed to support scaling food businesses. But the first step is really about understanding how your product is truly impacted by environmental conditions. And having that deep understanding and being the expert on the product itself will help you get towards selecting the right packaging. And if I may, I would put a plug in here for another guidebook that AURI released in the past 3 weeks, which is called a Food Shelf Life Guide for Scaling Businesses. And this will also help you get a better handle on what are those key attributes you need to be thinking about when you establish a shelf life. Obviously, we talked about a number of other attributes to think about in terms of specifying your packaging, but the product package interaction is one of the key elements to understand as you're speccing out what are the right places to go with your packaging. The other thing I'd think about, without diving too deep, is getting a real clear understanding of your competitive set. How are other products packaged in the category that you're competing in? If all of them are in pouches, in boxes, so take granola bars, for instance, then you need to think about, are there specific retailer requirements that would be necessary for packaging a granola bar? Or is that an opportunity to really stick out as a differential opportunity for you as a business to break through the clutter of the shelf set?
That was going to be my follow-up, Jason. As you mentioned that, do packers, distributors, or even retailers have their own packaging guidelines that I should be aware of?
Yes, there are some, though those tend to come out more so in individual meetings with buyers. They're always going to be interested in understanding the dimensions of your package and how it will fit on the shelf set. So it's incumbent upon the business to be able to provide that information in sell sheets and other materials, because those retailers in particular reset their shelf sets usually twice a year and want to have a plan for how those products are laid out. And so oftentimes thinking about how many packages you can get on a shelf and whether or not you can fit a full case on the shelf. So how far deep, how far back does it go on the shelf? How many slots does the package take up in terms of facings on the shelf? So how wide is that? Those are real considerations as retailers are thinking about product placement.
A lot of stuff to think about there. How does AURI fit into this picture for individual food entrepreneurs and small businesses? If I think AURI could help me, what's that process look like?
Well, typically AURI is a nonprofit corporation largely funded by the state of Minnesota with a mission to foster long-term economic benefit through value-added agriculture. And in large part, we do that through direct consultation, one-on-one, with small food businesses. You can think of us as a technical consultancy that is really focused on transforming Minnesota's rich agricultural resources into sustainable food products and food businesses. And so oftentimes that starts with a connection to AURI, either through our website, through a direct email or phone call to me, and we'll talk about what your needs are. AURI at its core is a technical organization. So we don't necessarily build out business plans, but we do have a lot of experience as it relates to connecting to consumers in the marketplace and providing resources, and in particular, network referrals to help you solve the problems that you're experiencing as you're building out those businesses. So oftentimes, after understanding and really interpreting what problem you're trying to solve, AURI, in a sense, we can help break through the clutter of all that needs to happen and direct you to the right location, whether that's opening up a project with AURI for technical support, or getting you to the right resource that can help you accomplish what you're trying to do.
You talked about the current lack of sustainable packaging. Any recommendations that are feasible to maybe reduce my packaging needs?
Well, I would say that one of the key things to think about is, can I minimize the amount of material that my product needs to go into? And so what I'm getting at is, how consistent is the size of your product? Can you improve the consistency of the finished product that you're making? Because if you can, and if you can deliver a product of the same dimensions consistently, what that will allow you to do is that will actually allow you to minimize the amount of packaging material you use by decreasing the size of the pouch. Let me give you a for instance. Let's go back to the example of making a bar. The more consistent you are in delivering a bar that has the same dimensions, length, height, and width, the easier it is for you to reduce the size of the package you deliver, because it doesn't need to account for variation in the product delivered to the package. As the length of that bar varies, if it varies substantially, the package has to account for the largest possible product that the process delivers to the packaging process. So if the bar comes to the package shorter than it typically is, there's a significant amount of wasted packaging material that doesn't need to be there, but it is there to account for the larger bars. So I would argue that the first thing to think about from a small business point of view is, how consistently can I deliver the product time after time to the packaging process? There are a number, and that's all about material source reduction as a first step.
What's a good path if I'm really into sustainable packaging? If I want to make sure we create more and support more sustainable packaging, what's a good path for kind of growing that?
It's an interesting question, Dan. Thanks for passing that along. There are a number of different ways to go about it. For many businesses, sustainability is built into the core philosophy of the brand, and that is, it's an admirable approach, and it's an approach that's been successful for many brands. But the reality is that when those brands are in their infancy, maintaining those sustainability practices is tough. It's hard. It's expensive. And so I would really think about how you effectively communicate the ideals of the brand, and how you can utilize those ideals to build out your total brand proposition, or your total value proposition. As you evolve, as your business becomes sustainable, you can really start thinking about implementing more of the strategies that you can explore, whether that's compostable packaging, whether it's material source reduction, as we've just talked about, where you improve the consistency of the size of your product. Those are kind of key questions you need to ask at the early stages of your business. But being able to communicate and effectively communicate those messages to your consumer is where I would probably get started. And then as you continue along the business and build it out so that it's a sustainable business model, you continue to research where the technology is headed, and where the most important pieces of that technology are places that you can apply to your strategies itself.
Jason, being price competitive is always a challenge for a small business or an entrepreneur. How much do some of these recommendations or requirements add to the cost of my product?
Well, I don't have a specific number, but again, it kind of goes back a little bit to this question around sustainability. If you have decided that you're going to implement sustainable solutions into your packaging strategy, you're going to see an increase in costs by definition. If you're trying to meet the minimum requirements of getting your product on shelf, you have a number of decisions to make that are going to be enabled by learning more about your minimum requirements. And so I'll give you a for instance. Packaging that, let's go back to the bar packaging example, as we're talking about granola bars again. As you improve the barrier properties of that bar that should extend the shelf life, you will increase the cost of that package material. And as you, and so in some respects, it's a balance between what you can afford to pay and how long you want that product to sit on the shelf. So in terms of total cost, what I would tell you is that you cannot discount the impact of cost on the total cost of goods that you're delivering. And you have to account for protection through the supply chain as well, which means it's not just your primary package cost on a per unit basis, but it's also the fractional cost on a per unit basis that you need to pay for the secondary package. And ultimately, as you scale, the cost of building out pallets. And all of those materials need to be taken into account so that you can present a true picture of the total cost that then gets built into your, let's call it your manufacturer's suggested retail price that you would deliver to the retailer, because they need to take all of those considerations into account. And let's face it, as a business, you want to be able to make money. And to make money, you need to have a clear picture of the total cost of your goods. So I would say, while I can't provide a numerical answer to what you should consider to be the cost of the package, I would say that you need to be smart about how much it truly is costing, and that needs to be included in the total cost breakdown in conjunction with the ingredients, the labor, and any toll manufacturing costs that you might have as a result of making your product at a co-manufacturer or for instance at a commercial kitchen where you have to rent space.
Jason, I'm going to give you one more kind of a prioritized question. When you think about whether an entrepreneur or small business is sourcing packaging for the first time, whether they're thinking about their design, whether they're thinking about their shelf life, what's the one big thing or one and two big things that they should be aware of to get them into the process?
I would say that one of the first things you need to think about, I'll go back to where we started with some of the Q&A, is have a clear picture of how your product performs over time and how it fails, because then you'll be able to properly specify the package and the packaging material to meet your needs. Secondly, I would have some conversations with your consumers and understand why your consumer purchases your product. Having a clear understanding of the decision criteria that a consumer uses for why they make a decision to purchase your product will help you most effectively communicate the most important pieces of your messaging on the front of the pack. Go back to the example I gave during the prepared content, which is this concept of presenting a laundry list of claims on a package. Not all of them are going to be relevant to the product, but in particular, not all of those claims might be relevant to the consumer that's purchasing the product. For instance, think about organic. Organic is a claim that tends to indicate product quality in addition to a sustainability message and an ideal for farming practices. But if you're delivering, let's say a product to the world that doesn't really have an impact from a sustainability point of view, or doesn't connect with an organic consumer, does it make sense for you as a business to invest in organic certification? If your consumer doesn't value the claim, does it make sense for you to invest in that claim? And that goes for ingredient choice. That goes for package choice. You can relate it back to the sustainability question again. If your consumer, your target consumer, does not value the biodegradability of the package, then is there a clear connect into what you're trying to deliver? Does a consumer believe that they're just paying more for something they don't value? So when it comes down to it, I would say the two things I would think about before you have conversations with professionals in the field are, how does my product fail over time, so that I can clearly understand the shelf life and how to deliver a shelf life? And then secondly, what do my consumers value about my product, so that I can most effectively develop an on-pack communication strategy before you even get to talking to a graphic designer.
Jason Robinson, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That concludes AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. Next month, on June 10th, AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday welcomes Ariel Kagan, Strategy and Innovation Specialist with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, to present a landscape view of the Minnesota halal and kosher meat market. Join us at noon on June 10th. You can register at auri.org/webinar-Wednesday. We are interested in your feedback on our Webinar Wednesdays as well, so please respond when we send you the event evaluations. Thank you for participating today, and remember, for more information on today's topic or any of the work AURI is involved with, go to auri.org.